The gunshot that killed my husband echoed through my dreams every night, but it was the stack of unpaid bills on my kitchen table that haunted my waking hours. I stood in the dusty main street of Abilene, Kansas, in the sweltering August heat of 1878, staring at the notice nailed to the post outside the general store, my hands trembling as I read the words that spelled out my ruin. Final notice, payment due immediately, or property will be seized. My name was Catherine Hayes, 24 years old, and I had become a widow 6 months prior when my husband Thomas took a bullet meant for someone else during a saloon dispute. He had been a good man, perhaps too good, always lending money to friends who never paid him back, always investing in schemes that never quite worked out. When he died, I discovered the true extent of our financial devastation. The ranch we owned was mortgaged twice over. The store where I worked had closed its doors. Thomas owed money to the bank, to merchants, to private lenders whose patience had worn as thin as the soles of my only good boots. I pulled the notice down and folded it carefully, adding it to the collection I kept in my reticule. 17 separate debts, totaling more than $3,000. It might as well have been $3 million for all the hope I had of paying it back. I had sold everything of value, my wedding ring, my mother's china, even the good furniture. All that remained was the land itself, 40 acres of Kansas prairie that the bank would claim within the week. The sun beat down mercilessly as I walked back toward the edge of town where my small house stood, little more than a cabin, really, weathered wood and cracked windows. I had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days, stretching what little I had to make it last. Pride kept me from accepting charity from the church, though Reverend Matthews had offered more than once. I was young enough to work, strong enough to survive, or so I told myself each morning when I woke to face another impossible day. I was so lost in my thoughts that I did not notice the man on horseback until his shadow fell across my path. I looked up, shielding my eyes against the glare, and found myself staring at a figure that seemed pulled straight from a dime novel. He sat tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and lean, with dark hair that touched his collar beneath a black Stetson hat. His face was sun-bronzed and angular, with eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and penetrating. He wore a dark vest over a blue shirt dusty from travel, and a gun belt sat low on his hips. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and carried a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time in Texas. "I apologize for startling you. I was wondering if you might direct me to the Hayes property." My heart sank. Another creditor, perhaps, come to assess what he could take. "I am Mrs. Hayes," I said, lifting my chin despite the fear coursing through me. "What business do you have with me?" He dismounted in one fluid motion, and I noticed he was tall, well over 6 feet. He held his hat in his hands as he approached, a gesture of respect that surprised me. "My name is James Garrett, ma'am. I knew your husband, though not well. We worked together on a cattle drive about 5 years back from San Antonio up to Dodge City. He was a good man, one of the few who treated me fair when others would not." I studied him more carefully now, noting the quality of his clothes despite the dust, the well-maintained firearms, the healthy horse with a good saddle, This was not a man struggling to survive. "I appreciate your condolences, Mr. Garrett, but Thomas has been gone for 6 months now. If you have come looking for money he might have owed you, I'm afraid you will be disappointed. I have nothing left to give." Something flickered across his face, an expression I could not quite read. I heard about his passing down in Texas. Took me some time to finish my business there before I could make the journey north. "I did not come looking for money, Mrs. Hayes. I came to pay my respects and to see if there was anything you might need." The kindness in his words nearly undid me. I felt tears prick my eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Garrett, but I am managing well enough." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, made worse by the notice crumpling in my reticule. He looked at me for a long moment. those gray eyes seeming to see straight through my pretense. "Forgive me for speaking plainly, ma'am, but you have the look of someone who has not managed well in quite some time. I do not mean to offend. I only mean to help, if I can." My carefully constructed composure cracked. Perhaps it was the heat, or the hunger, or simply the weight of 6 months carrying an impossible burden alone, but I found myself speaking words I had never intended to share with a stranger. "You want to help, Mr. Garrett, unless you have $3,000 in your saddlebags? I am afraid there is nothing anyone can do. I am a widow with debts beyond counting. The bank will take my land by week's end, and I will have nothing. So I thank you for your kind intentions, but I am beyond help." I turned to walk away, mortified that I had revealed so much, but his next words stopped me in my tracks. "I will pay them all for you." I spun around, certain I had misheard. "What did you say?" He met my gaze steadily. "I said I will pay your debts, all of them. Your husband once did me a kindness I never forgot. Let me do this for his widow." I stared at him, searching for the trap, the hidden price, the cruel joke. "You cannot be serious. You do not even know me. $3,000 is a fortune." "I am perfectly serious, Mrs. Hayes. I made my fortune in Texas, in cattle and silver. $3,000 will not break me, and it would honor the memory of a good man." He said it so calmly, as though he were discussing the weather rather than an amount that would change my entire life. "I cannot accept such a thing from a stranger," I protested, though my heart was racing. "It would not be proper. People would talk. They would assume that we—" I could not finish the sentence, but he understood. "Then I will pay the debts anonymously through a lawyer. No one needs to know the money came from me. You can tell people you had family back east who helped, or an inheritance you did not know about. Whatever story allows you to keep your reputation intact." I wanted to accept. God help me. I wanted it so badly I could taste it like water after days in the desert, but years of hard-won independence made me hesitate. "Why would you do this? What do you want from me in return?" He stepped closer, and I noticed details I'd missed before. A scar along his jawline, faint but visible. Calluses on his hands from hard work. Eyes that held both kindness and something deeper, a loneliness that matched my own. "I want nothing except to know I helped someone who needed it. Your husband helped me when I was young and desperate, gave me good advice that set me on the right path. I never got the chance to thank him properly. Let me thank him by helping you." I felt something shift inside me, the last wall of my pride crumbling. I do not know what to say. If you truly mean this, if you can really do this, then yes. Yes, I accept. And I will find some way to repay you, even if it takes me the rest of my life. A smile touched his lips, transforming his serious face into something warmer. "There is no debt between us, Mrs. Hayes, but if it would make you feel better, perhaps you could start by calling me James and allowing me to buy you dinner. You look like you could use a proper meal, and I have been eating trail food for 2 weeks. I would welcome the company." My stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, and I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. But something about his easy manner, the way he did not mock or pity me, made me smile, despite everything. "Very well, James. You may call me Catherine, and I accept your invitation, though I must warn you that I might eat everything on the menu." "Then we will order everything twice," he said, offering his arm. "I know a good restaurant near the hotel, unless you prefer somewhere else." I placed my hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength of him through the fabric of his shirt. "I have not eaten at a restaurant in so long I would not know a good one from a bad one. Lead the way." As we walked back toward town, his horse following docilely behind, I felt something unfamiliar stirring in my chest. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just the heady relief of knowing I would not lose everything after all. But there was something else too, something I was not quite ready to name. An awareness of the man beside me, of his quiet strength and unexpected generosity. I pushed the thought away, told myself I was simply grateful. Nothing more. We could not be anything more. I was still in mourning, still wearing the black dress that marked me as a widow, and he was a stranger, a drifter who would surely move on once his business here was concluded. I would take his help, pay off my debts, and rebuild my life alone. That was the sensible thing, the proper thing. But as we entered the restaurant and he pulled out a chair for me with a smile that made my heart skip, I wondered if sensible and proper were really what I wanted anymore. The restaurant was modest but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of roasted meat making my mouth water. James ordered without looking at the prices, asking for steak and potatoes, fresh bread, green beans, and apple pie. When the food arrived, I had to restrain myself from falling on it like a starving animal. I had not realized how hungry I truly was until faced with abundance. James ate steadily but watched me with those observant gray eyes. "When did you last have a full meal?" he asked quietly. I swallowed a bite of steak, so tender and flavorful I wanted to weep. "I have been eating," I said evasively, "just being careful with my resources." "Catherine." He said my name gently but firmly. "When?" I set down my fork, the truth bitter on my tongue. 4 days ago I had eggs and bread. Before that, I cannot quite remember. I have been making do with what I could grow in my garden and whatever I could afford at the general store when I had a few coins. I sold everything, James, everything of value, everything with memories, my mother's pearls, my wedding ring, furniture my grandmother brought from Pennsylvania, and still, it was not enough. The debts kept coming, interest piling on interest, and I could never catch up. His jaw tightened, and I saw anger flash in his eyes, though not directed at me. These lenders who kept charging you, they knew you were a widow with no means? They knew. Some were sympathetic but had their own obligations. Others, I shrugged. Others saw an opportunity. There was one man, Samuel Pritchard, who offered to forgive my debts if I would agree to certain arrangements. He is 60 years old and already has 2 wives buried. I told him I would rather starve. James's hand curled into a fist on the table. "Who else pressed you? I want names." "Why?" I asked, surprised by the intensity of his reaction. "Because when I pay your debts tomorrow, I want to know who to deal with personally. Some men need to learn that widows are not easy prey." Something warm bloomed in my chest at his protectiveness, though I hardly knew him. "The bank is owed $1,800, the general store $400, the feed store $200. There are smaller debts to individuals, notes my husband signed that I only discovered after his death. Altogether, it comes to $3,215. He pulled a small notebook from his vest pocket and wrote down the figures. "I will visit the bank first thing in the morning. Do you have all the paperwork, the notes, and contracts?" "Everything is in a box at my house. I kept meticulous records, hoping to find some error, some way out. There was none." "Then after dinner, if you would permit me, I will accompany you to your home and collect those papers. I will have everything settled by tomorrow afternoon." He said it with such certainty, such casual confidence that I almost believed him. "James, I need to understand something. You say my husband helped you, but this seems far beyond repaying a simple kindness. What exactly did Thomas do for you?" He was quiet for a moment, looking down at his plate. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. 5 years ago, I was 19 years old and working as a cowhand on that cattle drive. My father had died and left me nothing but debts of his own. I was alone, desperate, and contemplating something foolish. Your husband found me one night ready to rob the payroll wagon. He could have turned me in, could have seen me hanged. Instead, he sat with me for 3 hours talking about honor and second chances and how a man's character is not defined by his worst moment, but by what he does after. I listened, transfixed, seeing my husband through this stranger's eyes. Thomas had never mentioned this incident, but it sounded exactly like something he would do. "He lent me $20 from his own pocket," James continued. "Told me to take it and start over, do things right. I tried to refuse, but he insisted. Said I could pay him back when I became a success. I took that money, left the cattle drive at the next town, and went to work in the silver mines outside San Antonio. I saved every penny, learned the business, and eventually bought a claim that turned out rich. I looked for your husband after that, wanted to pay him back 100 times over, but he had moved on and I lost track of him. When I heard he had died, I knew I had missed my chance, but then I learned he had a widow, and I knew what I had to do. Tears slid down my cheeks before I could stop them. He never told me. He never said a word. That sounds like the Thomas I knew. He did not help people for recognition or reward. He did it because it was right. James reached across the table and covered my hand with his. The touch was warm, gentle, and sent an unexpected jolt through me. Let me do what is right, Catherine. Let me help you the way he helped me. I turned my hand over, clasping his fingers. Thank you. I do not think I can ever truly express how much this means, but thank you. We finished our meal in companionable silence, and then James paid the bill with money he pulled from a leather wallet thick with bills. He collected his horse and walked beside me as we made our way to my small house on the edge of town. The sun was setting, painting the prairie sky in shades of orange and purple, and I felt lighter than I had in months. My house looked even more shabby next to James's obvious prosperity, but he said nothing as I unlocked the door and invited him inside. The interior was sparse, almost bare, with only the furniture too worthless to sell remaining, but it was clean, and I had done my best to make it a home with wildflowers in jars and curtains I had sewn from old flour sacks. It is not much, I said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. It is yours, he replied simply. That makes it worth defending. I retrieved the box from my bedroom, heavy with papers and broken dreams, and handed it to him. He tucked it under his arm. I will return this to you tomorrow, along with receipts for every debt paid. In the meantime, I want you to promise me something. What? That you will go to the general store tomorrow and buy yourself food, real food, enough to last you a month. Put it on your account, and I will settle it when I pay the rest. I started to protest, but he raised a hand. Catherine, please, let me do this. You need to eat, to regain your strength. There is no shame in accepting help when you need it. I nodded, too tired and too grateful to argue. I promise. He smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger, less careworn. Good. I will call on you tomorrow evening, if I may, to deliver the receipts and to make sure you are keeping that promise. I would like that, I said softly, and meant it more than I wanted to admit. He tipped his hat to me and left, and I stood in the doorway watching him ride away in the fading light. For the first time in 6 months, I went to bed without the crushing weight of fear pressing on my chest. I slept deeply, without dreams, and woke to sunlight streaming through my window and the sound of birds singing. The next day passed in a strange haze of anticipation and disbelief. I went to the general store as James had instructed and filled a basket with flour, sugar, coffee, eggs, bacon, canned goods, and fresh vegetables. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the store, looked surprised when I told her to put it on my account, but she made no comment. I cooked myself a proper breakfast and ate every bite. Feeling strength return to my body, I cleaned my house thoroughly, not because James would see it, but because I could finally think about something beyond mere survival. I washed the windows, beat the rugs, and even picked fresh flowers for the table. I was hanging laundry on the line when I saw a rider approaching in the late afternoon. James dismounted and produced a leather satchel from his saddlebag. His expression was satisfied, almost pleased. "It is done," he said without preamble. "Every debt paid in full. The bank, the stores, the private lenders. I also had a conversation with Samuel Pritchard about his inappropriate proposal. He will not be troubling you again." My knees went weak with relief, and I had to sit down on the porch steps. All of it? Truly? He sat beside me and opened the satchel, pulling out a stack of receipts and paid notes. All of it. The land is yours free and clear. I had the bank manager prepare a new deed with no encumbrances. You own your 40 acres outright, Catherine. No one can take it from you. I took the papers with shaking hands, reading through each one. The bank loan marked paid in full. The general store account cleared, every single debt satisfied and stamped. I looked at James and saw him watching me with quiet intensity. "I do not know how to thank you," I whispered. "You have given me back my life." "You do not need to thank me, but perhaps you could answer a question I have been wanting to ask since yesterday." "Anything." He shifted slightly, and I noticed nervousness in the gesture, the first uncertainty I had seen from him. "Would you mind if I stayed in Abilene for a while? I have no pressing business elsewhere, and I find myself interested in putting down roots somewhere. Kansas seems as good a place as any." My heart began to beat faster. "I would not mind at all. In fact, I would welcome it." "Good." He smiled that transforming smile again. "Because I also find myself interested in getting to know you better, if you would allow it. I know you are in mourning, and I respect that. I am not asking for anything improper, but perhaps we could be friends, at least to start. I could help you with your land, getting the ranch back on its feet. You could show me the area, introduce me to people. We could simply spend time together and see where it leads." I knew I should say no. I was a widow, still wearing black, and the proper mourning period was a full year. But something about James called to me, something beyond gratitude. He was kind and strong and honorable, and when I looked at him, I felt alive in a way I had not felt in longer than I could remember. "I would like that very much," I said, throwing caution aside. "But James, you should know something. My marriage to Thomas was comfortable, but it was not a grand passion. We were friends who became husband and wife because it was practical, convenient. I cared for him, and I mourned his death, but I did not love him the way a woman should love her husband. I want to be honest with you about that." He reached out and took my hand, his touch warm and sure. "I appreciate your honesty, and I want you to know that when I look at you, I do not see Thomas's widow. I see a strong, courageous woman who has survived things that would have broken most people. I see someone I want to know better, someone who makes me think about building a life instead of just drifting from place to place." "You barely know me," I protested, but my fingers tightened around his. "Then let me get to know you. Let us take our time and do this properly. I am not going anywhere, Catherine. For the first time in my life, I want to stay." Over the following weeks, James became a fixture in my life. He rented a room at the boarding house in town, but spent most of his days at my ranch, helping me repair fences, mend the barn, and prepare the land for planting. He bought lumber and supplies, hired a few ranch hands, and slowly my property began to look like a working ranch again. We talked constantly, sharing our histories and dreams. I learned that he had grown up poor in Texas, that his father had been a gambler who drank himself to death, that James had worked hard jobs from the age of 12 to survive. His success in the silver mines had been part luck and part determination, and he had invested wisely, building a fortune that gave him freedom but no real purpose until now. I told him about my childhood in Pennsylvania, how my parents had died of fever when I was 17, how I had come west with a wagon train and married Thomas within 6 months of arriving because I needed security and he needed a wife. I told him about the lonely years, the growing debts, the fear that had consumed me after Thomas's death. We never spoke of love, but it grew between us like prairie grass, slow and steady and strong. I found myself watching for him each morning, listening for the sound of his horse. My heart would lift when I saw him riding toward my house, and I noticed everything about him. The way he pushed his hat back when he was thinking, the crooked smile he got when he was teasing me, the gentleness in his hands when he helped me down from a wagon. One evening in late September, nearly 2 months after we met, we sat on my porch watching the sunset. The air had turned cooler, a hint of autumn in the breeze, and I had made dinner for us as I did most nights now. James sat close enough that our shoulders nearly touched, and I was acutely aware of his presence, the warmth of him, the subtle scent of leather and soap. "Catherine," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." My stomach tightened with worry. "What is it?" He turned to face me, his gray eyes serious. "I am in love with you. I know it is too soon. I know you are still in mourning, but I cannot keep it to myself any longer. I love you. I love your strength and your courage and the way you face each day with determination, even when things are hard. I love the sound of your laugh and the way you bite your lip when you are concentrating. I love everything about you, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me." I stared at him, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "James, You do not have to answer now," he said quickly. "I know I'm asking a lot. I just needed you to know how I feel. I will wait as long as you need. A year, 2 years, however long it takes for you to be ready." I reached up and cupped his face with my hand, feeling the slight rasp of stubble against my palm. "You do not have to wait. I love you too. I think I have loved you since that first day when you offered to pay my debts without asking for anything in return. You gave me back my life, James, but more than that, you gave me hope. You made me feel like I could be more than just a woman surviving. You made me want to live again, really live." He covered my hand with his, turning his face to kiss my palm. "Are you sure? I do not want you to feel obligated because of what I did for you." "I am not with you out of obligation. I am with you because when I look at you, I see my future. I see a partner, a companion, someone who makes me better than I am alone. I see the man I want to spend the rest of my life with." He leaned forward slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted, but I did not want to. I met him halfway, and our lips touched in a kiss that was gentle at first, questioning, and then deeper as I wound my arms around his neck and poured 6 months of loneliness and longing into it. He pulled me close, his arms strong around me, and I felt safe and cherished and alive. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "Marry me, Catherine. I know we should wait, but I do not want to. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build this ranch with you, raise cattle and horses and maybe children if we are blessed. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you. I do not care what people say or whether it is proper. I want to be your wife." We were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the church with Reverend Matthews officiating. I wore a simple blue dress instead of black, a declaration that I was moving forward into a new life. A few friends from town attended, and if anyone disapproved of the quick remarriage, they kept it to themselves. James had proven himself to be a good man in the weeks he had been in Abilene, and most people seemed genuinely happy for us. James moved into my house that night, and it became our house. He brought his belongings from the boarding house, not much more than clothes and a few books, and we arranged them alongside mine. We made love for the first time in the bed I had once shared with Thomas, and I felt no guilt, only joy and passion and a rightness that had been missing from my first marriage. James was a generous and attentive lover focused entirely on my pleasure, and I discovered aspects of myself I'd never known existed. With Thomas, intimacy had been perfunctory, a duty I performed without much thought or feeling. With James, it was a revelation, a connection that went beyond the physical to something deeper and more profound. In the months that followed, we worked side by side to turn the ranch into something profitable. James bought cattle and horses, hiring experienced ranch hands to help manage them. I planted a larger garden and began raising chickens and pigs. We built a new barn and expanded the house, adding 2 more rooms for the children we hoped to have someday. Our first winter together was hard, with bitter cold and heavy snows, but we weathered it together. James taught me to play cards, and we spent long evenings by the fire, talking and laughing and making plans for the future. He was patient with my occasional nightmares, the lingering anxiety that would sometimes grip me when a bill arrived or an unexpected expense arose. He would hold me and remind me that we were secure, that I never had to fear losing everything again. Spring brought new life to the ranch and new hope to our marriage. In April of 1879, I realized I was pregnant. I told James one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. His eyes went wide, and then a smile broke across his face like sunrise. "A baby?" he breathed. We are going to have a baby? I nodded, laughing as he swept me up in his arms and spun me around. Careful, I protested. You will make me dizzy. He set me down gently, his hands going to my still, flat stomach. When? I think sometime in late October or early November. I'm not entirely certain. He dropped to his knees and pressed his ear against my belly, and I ran my fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had changed my life so completely. Hello in there, he said softly. This is your father. I just want you to know that you are already loved more than you can imagine. The pregnancy was not easy. I was sick for the first 3 months, and the summer heat made me uncomfortable and irritable. But James was endlessly patient, bringing me cool water and fanning me on the porch, rubbing my aching back and swollen feet. He hired a woman from town to help with the housework so I could rest, and he refused to let me do any heavy labor despite my protests. Our son was born on November 3rd during the first snowfall of the season. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when I thought I might not survive it, but James held my hand through it all. And when the midwife finally placed our baby in my arms, I looked down at his tiny red face and felt complete in a way I had never known possible. He is perfect, James whispered, tears streaming down his face as he touched our son's tiny hand. What should we name him? I had thought about this for months, and I knew exactly what I wanted. Thomas, I said, Thomas James Garrett, after the man who gave you a second chance and the man who gave me a new life. James kissed my forehead, my cheeks, my lips. Thomas James Garrett. It is perfect. You are perfect. I love you so much, Catherine. Our son thrived, growing strong and healthy through the winter. James was a devoted father, walking the floor with Thomas when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just watching him sleep. The ranch prospered too. Our cattle herd grew, and James made smart investments that increased our wealth. By the time Thomas was a year old, we had become one of the most successful ranches in the county. We employed 6 ranch hands year-round and hired additional help during busy seasons. The house had been expanded again, with a proper parlor and a room specifically for Thomas and any future children. I often thought back to that desperate day when I had stood in the street, staring at a notice that spelled my ruin, certain I had no future. And then James had ridden into my life like something out of a story, offering salvation without asking for anything in return. He had paid my debts, but more than that, he had shown me that I deserved love and happiness and security. We had 2 more children in the years that followed, a daughter we named Sarah in 1881 and another son we named Samuel in 1883. The ranch continued to grow, and James became a respected member of the community, serving on the town council and helping to establish a school. I worked alongside the other women in town to create a church auxiliary and a quilting circle, forming friendships that enriched my life. There were challenges, of course. A drought in 1882 that tested our resources, though James's careful planning saw us through. A fever that swept through the town in 1884, sparing our family but taking several neighbors. The normal struggles of raising children and running a ranch and maintaining a marriage through the years. But through it all, James remained my partner, my love, my best friend. He never let me forget that I was cherished, never took me for granted. He would still sometimes pull me aside in the middle of a busy day just to kiss me or surprise me with wildflowers he picked on his rides around the property. We still sat on the porch together in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about our days, our children, our dreams for the future. On our 5th wedding anniversary, James gave me a small wooden box. Inside was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a pendant shaped like a heart. "This is not as grand as the jewelry you had to sell," he said quietly, "but I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that represents what you mean to me." I fastened it around my neck, and it sat just over my heart. "It is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot imagine my life without you." "You will never have to," he promised. "I am yours for as long as we both live." He kept that promise. We grew old together on that ranch in Kansas, watching our children grow and eventually have children of their own. Thomas became a lawyer, moving to Topeka but visiting often. Sarah married a farmer and settled just 10 miles away, close enough that we saw her and our grandchildren regularly. Samuel stayed on the ranch, taking over the day-to-day operations as James and I slowed down with age. I never forgot those dark months after my first husband died when I thought I'd lost everything. They made me appreciate what James and I built together, made me grateful for every single day we had. He had paid my debts with money, but he had given me so much more than that. He had given me love, partnership, security, and a family. He had given me a life worth living. On a warm summer evening in 1903, James and I sat on the porch of the house we had built together, watching the sun set over land we had tended for 25 years. We were in our 60s now, our hair gray and our bodies slower, but our love had only deepened with time. 3 grandchildren played in the yard while Sarah and her husband visited, their laughter filling the air. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked James, taking his weathered hand in mine. "Coming to Abilene that day, paying all that money for a woman you did not know?" He turned to me with those gray eyes that still made my heart skip, even after all these years. "Not for a single second. That was the best investment I ever made. I got you, and this life, and a family I never dreamed I could have. If anything, you paid me back 1,000 times over just by loving me." I leaned my head on his shoulder, watching our grandchildren play, and thought about the unlikely path that had brought us here. A debt paid, a life saved, and a love that had grown from desperation into something beautiful and enduring. "I love you, James Garrett," I said softly. "Thank you for riding into my life that day." "I love you too, Catherine Garrett, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." We sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the prairie sky in shades of gold and rose. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last forever. The debts of my past were long paid, but the riches of my present were beyond measure. I had gone from a widow with nothing to a woman with everything that mattered: love, family, security, and a partner who cherished me every single day. That night, lying in bed with James's arms around me, I said a silent prayer of gratitude for the stranger who had become my everything, for the cowboy who had paid my debts and won my heart, for the man who had shown me that sometimes salvation comes when you least expect it, in the form of someone willing to help without asking for anything in return, and for the love that had grown from that act of kindness, a love that had sustained us through a quarter century and would carry us through whatever years remained. The ranch would continue after we were gone, passed down to our children and their children. But more than land or cattle or money, we would leave behind a legacy of love, of second chances, of 2 people who had found each other when they both needed it most and had built something beautiful together. That was the real fortune, the true wealth that could never be measured in dollars or counted in assets. It was measured in moments like this, in the quiet contentment of 2 hearts beating in rhythm, in the knowledge that we had been blessed beyond measure. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, secure in James's embrace, dreaming of all the years we had shared and all the years still to come, grateful every day for the cowboy who had ridden into my life and changed everything. My debts had been paid in full, but my heart overflowed with riches that would last forever.